Welcome back to Democracy Tomorrow, everyone. We have another episode today as part of our Democracy Mind series. Democracy Mind is the course that we're hosting later this year from October to December, which looks at the intersection between psychology and politics and how to merge the two to build the foundations for a more unified, a more peaceful, a more prosperous planet in which all of us can partake as equal citizens of the world. I'll hand it over to you, Jordan, to introduce today's honored guest.
Today we have Emil Ejner Friis. He's a writer, a philosopher. He's got a degree in history. He's the co-founder of the think tank Metamodern. He's been an activist in the Danish party The Alternative, and together with Daniel Gortz, he helped Hansi Freinacht publish the books The Listening Society, Nordic Ideology, and 12 Commandments for Extraordinary People to Master Ordinary Life. We're really glad to have you, Emil. Welcome.
Thank you. Glad to be.
Emil, can you help us understand your work? So, what do you do? What have you focused your career on? What are some of the key projects you're working on at the moment? And what's your why for doing this kind of work?
Yes, well, if we start with the what, I usually describe myself as a theory artist. Usually, like, people refer to me as a philosopher. However, I am not, an academic philosopher. I don't work in the university. I am not interested in academic philosophy. I'm interested in thought and thinking in itself. And I'm interested in conveying that in an artistic way, among others, through this Hansi Freinacht gestalt, which you might have encountered out there. And for the past 4 or 5 years, I've been teaching, what we can call experimental social theory online. Met a lot of wonderful people around the world. And in the past, I've co-authored these books together with my good friend Daniel. And the umbrella term for what we're doing is Metamodernism. Right now I am making an attempt to create an AI diagnostics tool for organizational development on these frameworks that I've been working on for the past, 15 years, as you said it, as an activist. And right now I feel it's time to, get real, get some business done, because at the end of the day, the revolution isn't paying for itself. So that's what I'm currently preoccupied with, apart from my online courses, of course.
Yeah, and so what's your why? So why, clearly politics, being a theory artist, this is something you're really passionate about. Where did this passion come from? Why have you chosen to focus in this area?
Well, initially, growing up, lots of trauma, like looking at the world and didn't like what I experienced. So initially, what drew me to all these things were a great deal of pissed offness, wanting to change things, get my anger out. However, now I just want to get rich.
There you go. Okay. And so what is Metamodernism, sorry. How would you explain it? You've just bumped into us, at a coffee shop, and we're asking you these questions. We've never heard of it. How would you explain it to us in a way that, makes sense?
I would try talking about something else, trying to slither my way out of it and talking about the weather, the coffee instead. Because, again, you'll have to explore this on your own. I hate the question, what is metamodernism? At the end of the day, the easy question is that, well, metamodernism is what comes after postmodernism, right? And postmodernism is what comes after modernism. And this is a century-old discussion in academia that social theories have preoccupied themselves with. And by saying that metamodernism is what comes after postmodernism, I'm saying that this is something that we're exploring together. But if you don't have that background at all, it really doesn't make, it doesn't bring much to like tell people what metamodernism is. So I'm more interested in people who on their own have explored these topics online, who come to me, because I'm not in the business of trying to sell metamodernism to the world. Done with that.
Yeah, thanks. One of my backgrounds is as a high school teacher, so that's something that's an area that I'm really passionate about. Is how do you make that connection between some of these concepts? So, I about 16 years ago, Scott introduced me to integral theory, and that was like my first experience of the sort of big picture philosophy. And ever since then, I've been trying to work out how do you explain integral theory to the average person. And so I guess maybe I'll have a little bit of a crack at something, and please correct me where I'm falling short. But my understanding is that modernism is this sort of paradigm that emerged around about the time of the scientific revolution, and it was unique in that it was able to use rationality and logic in a way that never really happened to the extent that it had happened before, and that gave rise to a whole lot of values, sort of more universal human values than had preceded it. And then in around the 60s, postmodernism came forth a little bit more, which was more of a philosophy that started to deconstruct like positionality, the way that language positions us and creates power and privilege, and that emerged with the kind of notion of sensitivity towards basically a lot of the voices that of people that hadn't been listened to and hadn't been appreciated previously. And so we had environmentalism and a increasing appreciation for universal human rights and things like that. And my understanding is that metamodernism comes in and has a particularly integrative approach where it's able to kind of recognize values of previous value systems and integrate them together so they're not so much at loggerheads. And I think my understanding is there's a particular sensitivity to the social, emotional kind of reality. And so how can politics be more sensitive to the fact that, humans have emotions that we develop psychologically through different stages. And that I think is a really nice intersection for what this podcast is about, which is all about really that intersection between our minds and our politics and what's that two-way street. So, Emil, I'd love to throw it over to you, and maybe Nigel or Scott, you can clarify it as well, anything that I've kind of blundered through or messed up in the process of trying to explain these things. But yeah, Emil, how does that sound to you?
Outstanding. That was an outstanding explanation, brief summary. Like, you students must love you. Like added standing ovations every time you enter the classroom. So yeah, basically that kind of sums it up. I would of course add that each of these stages or meta memes, they first emerge in the arts. That's something that I teach in my classes, and that also in the upcoming book that's never going to be released, Six Hidden Patterns. But yes, that we have this idea of this old Enlightenment paradigm, which was challenged in the post-war period. And now with metamodernism, we try to integrate not only modernity and post-modernity, but also the pre-modern religion, and even like animistic embodiment, and take all of these. I've started to talk about frequencies and integrate them into a more seamless, coherent whole, where I see that in many ways what we call metamodernism isn't like the last stage of a development. That's like a very enlightenment way of like a ladder. But in many ways, postmodernism, or what we can also describe as the critique frequency, is the latest, newest, the highest frequency, and metamodernism, that is like the integration of all these past frequencies, from the animistic wonder frequency all up the way to the rational and the critical frequencies.
Yeah, I'm wanting to throw it over to you, Scott or Nige. One thing that stood out from what you were saying, Emil, is the stage theories are like step ladders, but that doesn't exactly map onto the organic world, which is something Nigel and I have spoken about a lot. So I don't know, Nigel, if you wanted to jump in around that or something else.
I'm kind of interested in kind of the movement out of postmodernism, because I think I'm not sure how deeply postmodernism actually bit into the English-speaking world. There's certainly, kind of a lot of activity coming out of Europe in the 80s that translated into the English-speaking world, but we've become such a conservative lot in the English-speaking world that the idea of questioning structure, the idea of questioning form, the idea of looking at the inherent nature of things as, kind of power forms and power structures, I'm not sure how deeply that's embedded into our culture. Sort of there's sort of lots of interesting ideas, and I'm wondering if there is any kind of difference between what's happening in Europe and how you guys have been organising or kind of manifesting this work as compared to our end of the world, because there seems to be such a terrible movement towards conservatism. And there's a loss of the subtlety in terms of understanding the way that the world about us has been constructed. And whilst it's seemingly falling apart at the moment, I'm not sure that there's a lot of systematic thinking happening around it. But I'm not sure if it's different in your part of the world and to ours.
Well, we're preparing for war in my part of the world. Discourse has changed drastically. And I know this is something, it's very, if you come from the United States or from Australia, like you just don't have military threats around the corner. And it's kind of like, if we see, especially if we take a country like Sweden, which was the most progressive country until 10 years ago. However, in many ways, it was a top-down progressivism, and Swedes, like in Sweden, we very much have this, flock mentality, right? So what's benefit? Okay, let's say like multicultural things now. And now, like, the discourse has changed very much because of external military threats, like with Russia gearing up for war. Like, it's serious, right? And also because of internal threats, because, Sweden is currently engulfed in like the worst gang violence in all of Europe. Like, it's like like American, like they need to bring in American experts because like no one in Europe like understands this thing. And suddenly it's just completely changed. Like, and people just forgot all this like nice multicultural stuff they talked about 10 years ago. And it also sees like how like this top-down approach to progressivism, at the end of the day, people didn't believe any of the stuff. So the whole thing of like, it's also, we talked about the Enlightenment, and now we're in the middle of the Great Enlightenment. And we were closer to a listening society 10 years ago. The listening, like the book that Hansi wrote, was a product of its time. And now the moment has passed. It was kind of like, like if we take the Roman Empire, like antiquity, like the Greeks and invented like a mechanical computer, you look at their artwork, so skillful. It was almost like, correct mathematical, naturalistic perspectives. They had, stadiums like we have. They were like approaching modernity. And then they just missed. And then it took like another 2,000 years before something similar. And I feel that we're at the same point now, that we were like almost there, and now the moment has passed, and things are starting to decay. Like the aqueducts have, are crumbling, and there's no turning back from this. There's no way in hell that that the global civilization that we have now will continue to exist with this level of functionality. And in many ways, that also fits into to our own theory. Like, think about it. The Roman Empire, that was not like a post-Faustian, or actually that was like a deeply Faustian, or in spiral dynamics language, red empire, right? Um, and it was followed by, this religious period, like the Middle Ages, with this quintessential post-Faustian period. And that was like a spiritual progress, but material, it was a great setback, right? The roads went into disrepair, like the cities turned into villages, so on and so forth, but they abandoned slavery, right? It was no longer okay just to raise cartridge to the ground and so on. But materially speaking, what we will see now is what I'll call like the postmodern dark ages, right? There's no way that people in this world will become metamodern, that a larger share of the population will reach the integrative frequency. It's just, I just don't see it. What will happen is that we are reaching the biggest I told you so in history. Like, bear with me. Right now, this whole anti-woke thing, the woke people are getting their asses kicked, and we have all these neo-regressives taking over. But that doesn't change the fact that we have climate change and that the capitalistic system will collapse. I just look at Marx wrote about it. It will implode in on itself. And that will, of course, all the environmentalists, all the anti-capitalists can just lean back, and at some point, when they've finished their popcorn, they can point and say, I told you so. And that will, of course, lead to a dark age, a postmodern dark age, where these postmodern woke values become the dominant ones, just like, Christianity, Islam, and Buddhism during the Middle Ages. However, just as little as Christianity and Islam could fundamentally change society to become modern, right? Just as little is postmodern thinking ideology able at changing the capitalistic industrial society fundamentally. That requires a metamodern renaissance at some point, when the dust has settled and we see where the chips land, and all of us sitting here are dead. So yeah, that's where I see, I can bring you empirical pessimism, and only theoretical optimism.
It's really, really interesting, the parallel that you're making there between the Roman historical period, where the republic cedes to empire, which cedes to oligarchy, and the concentration of wealth into a tiny group of people who are entitled, which is sort of something that we've seen amplifying, isn't it, since particularly since the global financial crisis in 2009. This incredible concentration of wealth. What followed the Roman period, the collapse of the Roman Empire, was the growth of the tribes and lots of multiple voices throughout Europe. It was a very different historical period, and I guess what I'm hearing there, Emil, is, and this is my interest from a psychologist, something at the individual level has to happen, something at the individual level about personal responsibility taking, processing our cumulative traumas, finding ways to move out of reactive, power-based, control-based, interpersonal relationships, and some different way of holding ourselves as citizens, some different way of holding responsibility for participating in the world, and rather than sort of sitting back and going, whoopsie, that, hey, if I'm not doing something, then I'm actually participating in this decay into a dark age. I don't know if what you think about individual responsibility, I guess, is my question to you.
Well, people will need to feel the pain, right? So pain is our biggest teacher. Yeah. Okay. Maybe our second biggest teacher after Jordan. Just take the Second World War. We had an explosion in critical intellectual thought following Hiroshima and Auschwitz, we had an explosion, a rapid development towards more progressive thoughts because of the Second World. If we hadn't had the experiences, the horrors of the Nazi regime and all the bad stuff that happened, we wouldn't have progressed. Like, we need to learn. It's also, we would not have traffic rules if people hadn't gotten killed, right? Like, if no one had ever been killed in traffic, huh. And it's the same here. Also, people are not gonna leave the modern value meme behind them unless they suffer. In fact, people who gravitate towards critical postmodern thought always do so because they've hurt themselves, because of the pain they have felt because modernity hasn't worked for them. And it's the same here. People will need to experience that the easily obtained postmodern critical thought, after several generations, just ain't gonna get the job done. And then people will have to put in the effort to obtain the more difficult metamodern way of thinking. Again, trial and error. And these things take time.
It's a real comment on our state of evolution, isn't it? That, avoidance of pain becomes, the primary cultural motivator rather than, kind of, I don't know, aspiration, care for our community, finding a better self. Those kind of seem to be very, very minor considerations in a globe that's driven by fear and pain avoidance.
I'm curious, the last few guests we've had are integral theorists and, have painted a kind of optimistic view of, evolution and the way that we're, it's the kind of inevitability, as Scott put it, that, things are just going to keep evolving. And also they're both, in America and tuning in from America. So it's lovely to have a European voice. Scott, did you want to, because I know this has been this like, realism, optimism, pessimism. We've had lots of conversations about the state of the world, what the future holds. I'm curious, where you're landing in this conversation, Scott, and if you've got any questions for Emil.
The work that all of us have been doing in our various fields is obviously premised upon the reality of the world in which we all live. And if we just go back a century, I'm an international human rights lawyer. So, I have structures within which I operate and visions of a better world based upon the laws and standards that have been developed in the aftermath of global conflict, right? And, if we go back a century or so, very much in accordance with what you were saying, Emil, it took World War I in order to create the League of Nations. The League of Nations, unfortunately, lasted a very short time. Just a reminder to everybody that although Woodrow Wilson, the United States president, was the leading mind behind the League of Nations, the United States refused to ratify the League of Nations treaty and did not engage with it. Very important to remember that based upon what's happening today in that country. It took World War II to build the international legal order in which we now all exist. United Nations, all subsequent treaties, standards, and acceptable levels of behavior, which has led us all the way to institutional destinations that would have seemed impossible a few short decades ago. Not just the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights and things of that nature, but the International Criminal Court, where individual dictators are being held legally accountable for their crimes. So you can spot all sorts of steps forward, all sorts of evolutionary dimensions to the international order of which we are all a part. For those of us who think in these institutional and whatever you want to call it, visionary terms, obviously our hope and aspiration is that it doesn't take another conflict, another conflagration in order to create, let's call it UN 2.0 or Institutional Global Development 3.0, League of Nations, UN, and then something else. So I mean, I'm a European citizen too. I mean, so I'm a Dutch citizen by naturalization, and I'm very much engaged with the continent every single day. Um, I do recognize a lot of the changes that you're mentioning. I've spent a lot of time in Sweden and as well, and all of Scandinavia, etc. I'm not sure I'm as pessimistic in terms of the war speak as you are, but I don't live there now, so you may well be right. I know that Sweden, for instance, has changed very dramatically. I mean, every time I used to go there, which is probably, I don't know, 40 or 50 times for decades, the whole conversation was, how did you guys do it? It's so amazing here. Wow. Men get a year off, when they have a baby, and it's all fully paid, and it's just this paradise-like place. It's utopia in reality. And it's almost, impossible to imagine the extent to which, as you mentioned, gang violence has emerged, racism has really emerged, this anti-immigrant sentiment. I mean, the last I looked, it was 1 out of 8 Swedes was foreign born or something to that effect. A process started by Olaf Palme and others in the 60s and 70s when indeed you guys were at the vanguard of the global progressive movement. So, that country has experienced, in an individual sense, the decline that you've been mentioning, right? So I guess the ultimate question is, can we go forward as a species, as a global society, without that stage of brutal conflict and decimation that you seem to think we're on the cusp of, or maybe even mired in already? Or can we go forward without that and use reason and use all the advantages that we have with the modern age to begin to build structures which can effectively help us avoid that very dismal future that I think a lot of people are talking about now? I mean, you can't go an hour on the internet with interesting people without the word collapse being mentioned, collapse and demise and decline. And, I'm sure some of that becomes a fait accompli, it becomes like, oh, wow, I can't do anything. It's going to all collapse anyways. So what should I do? So I guess that's the first question. What can people do in this very difficult um, context? And what gives you hope that we can move forward in a positive way, minimizing the negative effects of the decline of the current system in which we live?
Yeah, that was a lot. Well, I feel no hope, nothing. However, where there's hope, there's death. Um, don't need it. What you say is that that there are like so many, like there's more things to do now than ever, right? Think about it. If everything was just like fine, right? There's a chaos is a ladder after all. I don't believe we can like say like things that were built poorly need to collapse. Yeah. And it's only from the ashes that something new can grow. But let's look at the positives here. Like, the meaning crisis has kind of like the listening society has been canceled, but so has the meaning crisis. There will be plenty of meaning to go around. There will be plenty of meaning to save because we have this idea that, I have to like save work with this like abstract things, and then we like start trying to pull levers that aren't connected to anything. But suffering is just all around us. Yeah. There's like plenty of things you can do personally to help people around you. Right. There are like so many good causes out there. It might not enter, the headlines. You might not get a Nobel Prize for it. Like moving a dead child out of the rubble in Gaza isn't going to land you a Nobel Prize. Yeah. It's probably not gonna end like this, not much glory, but in that. However, if you want to do some good in the world and have a meaningful life, there are plenty of opportunities. Um, but this global system that we have right now, it's going to collapse. Like, look who's in charge, what they're doing. And look, like, we had, like, just if we go 10 years back, and like with all the resources and smart people, we actually have relatively sane people, both in the White House, like, just couldn't do it. And at the end of the day, it's also that people don't care. Just think about it. You're sitting there trying to run a country, and that, okay, the environment, and then, well, let's add a fuel tax. And then France is on fire, right? People want to keep their high levels of consumption. Even, in our circles of goody good guys, like, how many people are sailing across the Atlantic? Like, everyone's flying. Like, we are not going to change. Like, we are going to stop flying when there's no more jet fuel, right? There's this idea that we can have a soft landing. No, we're gonna crash. It's in our nature. And think about it. You were talking about evolution, and they say, "Oh, evolution." This evolution, it's like we could also. There's a really good description of an alternative term for evolution. There's like non-random elimination. Evolution is based on death, on things ceasing to exist because they just couldn't survive. And then it's only like, that's evolution. It's fucking brutal. And also, if we talk, with all our nice eco friends, ecology is good, right? That is like just soft, and they're like bunnies and flowers. Think about ecologies are, per definition, more brutal places than economies. Just think about it. It's death and decay all over, organisms eating each other, and a lot of organisms just aren't strong enough, not fit enough. And at some point, in equilibrium, and things will blossom and they will flower.
And so I'm curious about what we can do. Like, one of my mentors, I don't know if you knew Terry Patton, but he had this expression of like he called it the Genjo koan, like the great koan, as like, in a way, facing the poly crisis, like, reading the news, like grieving, like going through the internal journey that is like showing up as a conscious critical thinker in this time. Like, it's very painful. Is it? But his view is that, in a way, it's a spiritual experience to do that, like to actually face the reality of this moment is transfigurative. Like, it's forcing us to become bigger humans in some kind of very uncomfortable way. And no one, like, the koan is like this. They describe it sometimes as like a hot ember that's stuck in your throat, and you can't quite swallow it, and you can't cough it out. You just forced to sit with it. And it's almost like none of us can get out of this koan. We're all like interwoven in this together. So I guess I'm curious, like, what can we do? Like, what are the skills and like you mentioned, there's a tremendous amount of meaning now. Like, talk about a meaningful time to be alive in this 14 billion year long journey where there's this huge thing going down. Like, that's incredible. So what are some of the skills, like, in the course that we've got coming up? We're trying to look at, like, what are the core psychological skills and the core political skills that are necessary for us to have the biggest possible kind of impact. So I'm curious, on that very practical side of things, like, what are the things that we can and should be cultivating? What do you think are the highest levers that we can be doing to help us move through this transition as best as possible?
That's a big question. I don't think I have the answer to that. I'm going to talk about like developing resilience. But when things hurt like a motherfucker and they break you, okay, what can you use that for? And we all have like our individual path to like, we are positioned very differently. So I don't want to advise anyone to like, What I'm interested in doing now, because I have abandoned, I feel kind of like I have finished my service when it comes to politics and activism. Like we did write a couple of books. I've been an activist. I have, my service is over. Now it's up to someone else. And so also I have to, like, the listening society is still a long term attractor. But the listening society that we like, it's going to be future generations who will have to formulate their listening society if we survive. Right now, I feel it's up to you guys out there, the people who have adopted Metamodern frameworks, to come up with your visions. And I'm happy to provide some of the building blocks. We run these courses. I say it's not about the listening society anymore. It's about your vision and what me and my colleagues can do to help you. And I also believe that the AI can be a tool to make organizations more. We're working on this tool, consultant. Well, then we're going to see product service to make organizations more resonant, to have them conduct actions on an appropriate level of complexity, um, to identify what frequency they are, make companies more sustainable. And I'm not talking about Greensand, but simply to survive. Because we see, if we take a company like Meta, big, but they're not very resonant. They're out of tune. They are not sustainable in the way that they are going to die, because Darwin is going to put them out of commission. Because I believe that right now, like, the hot mess of politics cannot work with that, but we can work on an organizational level. And actually, that's also like I've noticed. I don't know if you're aware of. I have this model, like, art always comes first. Like in every sequence of development, metamimetic development, you have art, like the Renaissance came first. Then you have philosophy, as you talked about the scientific revolution. It's also the birth of modern philosophy. Then you have the entrepreneurs, the industrial revolution. And then you have politics. It was following the industrial revolution, following the modernly inclined entrepreneurs, that we began to have civil rights. And it's only after that, again, that people actually adopted modern morals. It's arguably only after 1945. And also just something that every man is created. We're really struggling with that basic creed of modernity, even though we live in a world that is fully that's very postmodern, and where metamodernism has emerged. So anyway, what I'm trying to say here is that me starting out at politics, that was a wrong move according to that model, because art comes first. So I have gone, if we look at the whole Hansi Feinak project, it's more art than philosophy, And now I feel I am ready for the next step, namely entrepreneurship. Because when it comes to organizations out there, whether they're not for profit, non-profit, it doesn't matter. Teams of people who provide good services or products that the world need. Yeah. I feel I can work with that. And that's a place where we can implant metamodern DNA. Because when it comes to politics, it's like, fighting with windmills it doesn't work right now. People aren't there. So that's where we need to think about what level we're working on.
I love that. Scott, I'm curious if you've got any thoughts around that, because, I know you've spent your career focused on the political side and creating change at the political level. I'm curious what comes up for you around that.
Well, maybe I've gone full circle too, and I'm in the art phase now.
Oh, wonderful.
Writing novels.
Yeah.
I write fictional novels about the world I want to see, that I have utterly failed to be able to create in the real world over the last 40 years. So I'm feeling pretty arty, Feeling pretty arty at the moment.
Okay, you are already in tune. I think our diagnostics tool, like, you will just get a lot of green lamps.
That's right. Just wait until you see the second novel. Oh my goodness. I'll be in more trouble than most artists throughout history, that's for sure. No question about it.
And Nigel, what about you? What as we're having this conversation, I know you're really invested in trying to help shift come through by the democratization of like the core psychological skills for healing and development, and doing a lot of work in that space. Yeah, what's coming up for you in this?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I've been working on for a long time is trying to understand the nature of psychological development and how we're developing and what we develop through. And one of the interesting things in psychology is the complete absence, other than Carl Jung, in exploring the symbolic register of mind, that we don't really pay much attention to this incredibly powerful organizing principle that we would culturally describe as art. It's a symbolic expression of aspiration, hopes, ideals. It's operational in every single one of us. And yet our psychology goes near it. We don't talk about it. There's a little bit of object relations work that's gone on historically, and Carl Jung, as I said, is a sort of a novelty piece, really, in the history of psychology. And so there's this extraordinary human resource that's available to every one of us that doesn't get tapped into. And instead, what we collapse into, and I think that's what I'm hearing with you, Manel, we collapse into this reactivity, this survivalism, this to dominate and create artificial hierarchies to try and pretend that life isn't brutal, nasty, and short. That we don't explore this whole fecund field of potential that's sitting in these 8 billion skulls on this planet.
You were talking about like healing and development, and of course I'm sitting here because I've been writing about psychological development, in the vein of Wilbur and the rest of the gang. And I must have been like 15 years ago. I was all about development, climbing this ladder and reach these higher states of consciousness, because that just sounds awesome, doesn't it? Going to a therapist and talk about your father does it? No, it's not. No. However, then, with years, I got a little bit wiser, and, I've been teaching in my classes that, okay, guys, yes, I'm going to teach you about these fancy, amazing developmental theories, but just keep in mind that for every unit of development, we need 2 units of healing, right? And then I got a little bit older. And I'd say that where I am now, it's just like, it's all trauma, baby. It's all trauma. It's just healing all the way. And you might, after you have healed some of your trauma and had that release, um, uh, 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 delude yourself into believing that you have reached some higher state of consciousness, and that's fine if that is the candy bar you need at the end of that long journey. But I'd say that it's the trauma that is holding us back from becoming, the full connecting beings that we are designed to be. And I believe that modern society is severely traumatizing us from the day we are born. And, we are all shell-shocked and heartbroken beings that seek to connect both with other human beings and ourselves. And I believe the only way for us to learn that is the hard way. It's the fabric of bliss and agony.
Yeah, I think I just really resonate with that, Emil. It's sort of a lot of my work over the last 30 years has been in complex trauma, family violence, institutional abuse, cults, so the way that power operates on individuals, and in family systems. So I think it's really interesting that, PTSD was named in around 1985, 86. PTSD was first articulated in the DSM-4. So for the entire scope of human history, We've only noted trauma as a cultural phenomenon 40 years ago.
Well, it's like pre-modern cultures, people will use different wording, like demons and so on to describe.
Yeah, invasions from outside, or they'd see it as moral failing, like battle fatigue, or, these kind of ideas were that there was something fundamentally wrong with you if you had an adverse response to brutality. So that there's something that culturally, I don't think, I think you're pointing to this as if someone doesn't understand they carry trauma, and you talk to them about trauma, they usually react defensively. Most people don't say, "Oh, I've got trauma. Thanks for pointing that out to me. Now I'm going to heal."
Sounds like so much fun. I mean, it sounds like more fun to take the developmental escalator, and then, rise to the top of human hierarchies, right? Sit there and weep in front of a therapist. Not so much. But that's the hero's journey. Because what I've seen is also in this field that I've been in that ain't it. Like this whole developmentist fetishism that I see, and I've met a lot of people who do deludely think that they are on these high stages, and like, no, that's just like the trauma. You were bullied, and now you want to read some books and then say and then of course there's this loophole to fascism in this developmental. And again, I just need to say to all listeners out there, metamodernism is not about being anti-woke. If that's all you have to say, have some smart arguments about why postmodernism is bad, that ain't it. Just wanted to say that.
So, Emil, I'm really curious about these experiments you've run in terms of these courses. And so I don't know if you're open to share the kinds of people that have shown up for these things. So I've done quite a lot of online courses in the integral sort of space and other sorts of spaces, and I've really enjoyed a pretty remarkable group of people often show up, but also I guess what you're sharing about, there's some really odd developmental stuff that can happen in terms of the way these ideas are used. And so I'm curious if you're open to share about what your experience has been running these courses.
Are you implying that I'm experimenting on my poor students? I
The
would
guinea
never
pigs.
anything like that. No, it's pretty basic. It's just me showing PowerPoints and teaching, and then there's Q&A afterwards. The plus side is that I'm very funny, and I have some really, really good slides. So basically what I do is that I teach Metamodern theory. In my introduction course, I introduce people to all of these developmental, psychological developmental theories and so on, just the basics and the Dutch school and so on. And then in the bigger course, in the introduction course, I also introduce people to the works of Hansi so that the people who aren't familiar with this field, are up to date. And then in the big course, I go through a lot of stuff. The thing is, what I have discovered that makes it relevant to normal people out there is that not only do we see that there's a link between psychological development and social cultural development, with spiral dynamics that, modern people in modern society and so on. But the same stages also exist in organizational development. That's super interesting. And that brings in a bit of a different crowd. So it's also that at this autumn, there's going to be a lot of people from the company that I'm starting. We're going to use it as kind of an internal training thing. And then there's going to be, the normal Hansi fans and people. Yeah, so it's really a mixed bag of people, I'm trying to say. But the thing is that I believe that these theories are of really big relevance to organizations, businesses. This interplay between, the big, we have, historical, evolutionary development and development of the individual, and then the cross point between the meso level, when people come together in creating an organization. Like, just think about it. We go, and I take people through the stages, both on the historical level, on the psychological level, and then it's relevant to the organizational level. And just like, think about it. You have like the startup phase. And that's like we call it, like, we also refer to it as like the wonder frequency, the animist meter meme. And then at some point, someone needs to step up and, just like we call it, step into the power frequency, which corresponds like to the red, or like the Faustian meter meme, where you create this like strong hierarchy and you get things done. And, maybe a few people will cut themselves, right? But in order to get things. And then, following that, an organization will need to start developing an identity in order to make the organization coherent. This is like the axial age, like the blue value meme, what Hansi calls the post-Faustian meter meme. And then eventually, as an organization grows, it will require intensive rationalizations, departmentization, the reason frequency, modernity. And then following that, only then do you call in the DEI. It's not DYI, no, DEI, like the critique. And again, I feel that this model can help a lot of people, especially people who work in nonprofits. They will very much like to start with the DEI stuff, right? Like, this is the first thing. Okay, let's just like you've barely no. You need to be completely imbued in the wonder frequency of wild creativity. And when something has blossomed up, then you need to go into like hardcore power frequency. How do we get things and how do we make things real? That is not the point where you call in like neither McKinsey or the DEI consultants. That comes way later. So there's a certain, developmental trajectory, not only to human beings and to human civilization itself, but also to organizations. And I think that that's where we can do something, because in this field there's a lot of like individual psychological development. I think it's great that people have all these full body orgasms in Bali and discover themselves, and we come up like with much better human beings but that in itself is not going to save the world. It's only when we start coming to creating strong institutions, organizations, start working together, that we can get shit done. So that's the gist of it.
I'm thinking of what you were saying earlier about the incredible meaning that's available to us, and it sounds like there's opportunities at the individual level, and then there's opportunities at the interpersonal level and at the group level. And so, yeah, the work that you're doing and that you're looking to sort of pioneer with this company is around how do we apply these things at the level of organizations. I'm
Yes.
curious, like, I'm curious with the graduates of your course and things like that. Like, have you had the opportunity to keep track of the way that they express their metamodern activism or their, like, what are there examples you can give of the way that people have used these ideas in practical ways after the trainings, after the courses, in their businesses, in their personal lives, in their relationships? Like, that's something that we're kind of thinking about for our upcoming Democracy Mind courses. Like, what are like super practical ways? We've got 25 ways that you can express world citizenship as one of the weeks that we're going to look at in the course. So yeah, I'm curious if you can share around that.
Well, I cannot reveal too many details about my clients, but for instance, of getting the aesthetics right, that your aesthetics, are in tune with the meta meme that you want to express. A lot of, it's just enough just to be the good guy saying the good guy things, right? But if you are not, again, it all starts with art, right? Art is important because it communicates something. So that's something that I've helped people with in order to develop metamodern aesthetic sensibilities, and also give advice if you don't quite have that sensibility. Find someone who has, like, it will help you. And some of the results that I've seen have been really, really good. Also, another thing is that trying to kick people into the power frequency. People really love to be in the startup frequency, creativity, where everything, and there's an adversity towards, power and doing a lot of grindy stuff and putting people to work. So that's also something that has been a direct result of my courses. And then again, I also provide entertainment. Like, it's 50% because most people show up because they're interested in the theories. And again, there's a lot of the same people showing up again and again. So I guess I'm doing something right. So it's both, intellectual entertainment, but also useful tools to apply to your organizations, maybe even in your own life. I don't take any responsibility for that, though.
One of the questions I've been trying to solve in the most recent course I've done is, like, how do you help people have a hunger for meditation? So a lot of people know they should or think they should meditate. There's like 19,000 academic studies or something on the benefits of meditation or different aspects of meditation. But then a lot of people just don't want to do it or don't think they can do it. And so the question I've been exploring is, like, how do you give someone a hunger for meditation? And I guess I've been thinking about a similar thing in terms of politics. Like, how do you, like, rather than be like, and this is actually something that I'd love, Scott, your view on in a second. But one thing that we often think about is this sort of utopian world democracy where everyone has equal human rights and, like, all those kinds of things, and then we can solve climate change, etc. And sometimes that I find that very inspiring and very, like, generative and helpful, and other times I feel like that's so idealistic and distant from the person I'm talking to. I'm much more interested in the question of, like, how can we become hungry to become better citizens? Like, what's the how do we help people? And I look at our political system and I go, you know what? We're really not incentivizing political engagement. Like, it's so fucking stressful. There's so much shame and judgment that we're lumping on each other based on our perspectives. And at the moment, I think we're not collectively incentivizing a hunger for engagement. We're if anything, incentivizing people to, like, just disengage. And so that's one of my questions is around this project is, how do we help people have a hunger to be better citizens, whatever that may be? And so I'm curious about, like, that question, like, if you've thought about that, or, like, because I could imagine a different social environment, different political environment where, we do express these metamodern integral values where we, like, first and foremost, no matter what you believe, Emil, I love you as a fellow human being, and I love that you're engaging in politics, and I really want to hear your perspective. And yes, we may have different views. Like that's a very different vibe to, like, oh, you've just said this thing that, goes against my political in-group, and so now I'm going to cancel you, and, all that kind of thing. So I'm curious about this question of, like, hunger and passion and drive, and if you have any sense of if we can incentivize that, or how we build that.
Well, Hansi, and I might be inclined to agree with him. Hansi would say that we should enable more people to fuck like beasts. In order for people to care about other people and the world around them, they need to have their needs satisfied, right? And again, this is the whole point of, like, the listening society, that we have these, emotional needs for community, esteem, self-actualization, and so on. And if these needs aren't adequately met, people will put a lot of effort into satisfying, and sometimes not in the most benevolent way possible. right? So, for instance, if we take, the post-forced, the axial process. Oh, so the world is a bit of a mess because people have all these desires. So how about we just say that it's bad to have these desires, right? And then people should just do good things instead of bad things, right? So we just agree, no fucking like beasts, right? Well, it didn't go very well. And even if, like, some people, like, if we take the Axial Project, like Christian actually succeeded in stopping people, preventing people from fucking like beasts. But then, there's a little guy named Freud who describes some mechanisms and then is just channelizing into, I don't know, going on a crusade, and like tear down Jerusalem. So we need to think of human beings as organisms who have certain needs, and the whole project is to satisfy those emotional needs. Again, modernity is so blindsided by its objective splendor and all the stuff that we have created, which very ineffectively, in many cases, satisfy these emotional needs, like especially when it comes to community and esteem. But again, people who don't have their needs met, they tend to gravitate towards lower frequencies. Okay. So you grew up in the ghetto, and you become a violent gang member, or join the mafia, something like that. You grew up with privilege, and you might join Greenpeace. So again, we need to see that in some ways it's a bit of a catch-22, that obviously we need people to gravitate towards higher value memes. Modernity is not enough. We need to have people at least on green postmodern values. But the only way we can do that is to have, policies, like progressive policies that will actually address the needs that they have. Like you can see, so it's kind of difficult, chicken and hen, like how can we, do progressive politics, so that people are happy and content, so that they start becoming more progressive, and then in turn elect politicians who are more progressive, right? So this is like the $1 billion question. Like, where are the pressure points in the world system? What can we do? And what I did was the wrong thing. I found 2 pressure points, but 2 weak pressure points. Due to my own history, background, I was like, okay, mental health. Again, we made like a positive story about it, personal development. But again, the mental issues. And the other one we have was like the broken institution. We need to work on democratization politics, so we need to fix the institutions, democratic institutions, and then we need to fix mental health. And people said, oh, that's wonderful, but it's just too boring. Right? Because these do not elicit like, okay, so, hey, everybody, let's reform the institutions of democracy. It's just not very sexy. And there's also, okay. So mental health, all these like young people cutting themselves. Oh, that's very sad. But, there's like something much more exciting in my feed. And what is the strong pressure points? Well, that is the broken gender, sex, family formation complex. The whole, like, if we just take the trans thing, like people are obsessed when it comes to all the gender and sex stuff, and family. Just like look at your feet. And the other strong pressure point, that is actually the internet monopolies, right? Like people are fairly interested when it comes to privacy online. These big colossal monopolies that are dominating our lives. These 2 topics elicit strong emotional engagement, and actually both of these have given rise to political parties in Sweden. We have a feminist party and we have a pirate party. That's interesting. Like, it's strong enough to create this momentum. And I believe in order to fix the two weak pressure points, namely the broken democratic institutions and mental health. We need to fix these internet, like, the platform, social media. It's making people sick, and it's the same thing when it comes to the broken gender, sex, family formation complex, that we need to figure a way for men and women to find each other again. Yeah. First of all, otherwise it's bye-bye civilization. But also, when you have millions of men who don't get laid, well, that's the stuff that wars, revolutions, and terrorism is made of. We need to fix the broken gender, sex, family formation complex. How can we create families that stay together, have more love, have men getting partners? And again, that will lead to better mental health. And through that, we might have a chance at reforming the democratic institutions. So if I were to, where should I focus my interest? The gender, sex, family formation complex and the internet platform monopolies.
Yeah, so it sounds like humans have these different levels of needs, and if you're just trying to, like, moralistically or something, like, just appeal to these higher order needs, but there's all these issues at the lower levels, it's not going to get the punch and the power and the buy-in and the grab. And that it sounds like you've learned that the hard way. Yeah.
I have no power whatsoever.
Nigel, I'm curious, Nigel, your work often has focused on, like, motivational systems and needs and things like that. And I'm curious what your thoughts are around this. Like, how do we, where do we focus our attention? Which needs do we focus on helping people satisfy? Or how do we describe our democratic and mental health goals in terms that appeal to people's motivational systems? I'm really curious your views around that.
I guess the most basic of, as I think the theme is emerging, survival and reproduction are the primary motivators. It's why that's the meaning of life, to keep being alive, and then to fucking make more of us. That's what it's all about. And we've spent a lot of time trying to sanitize that, regulate it and control it and pretend it's not real. And so we create all these fables and fantasies to repress people. Which is what made Freud famous. Freud is a known figure because he penetrated to extend the metaphor, but the artistic community. We know Freud because writers picked up Freudianism, not because a bunch of psychologists went off to their little rooms with their cardigans and their sort of it was the writers. It's the Henry Millers and the Anais Nins and the Gertrude Steins, and they're why we understand. And it's because Freud was tapping into the repression of human sexuality. That Victorianism had repressed, constrained, strangled that reality under this weird kind of weed of Christian ideology, and people were just screaming out to express. So repression is not a really good way of regulating people. And the answer to repression is not to sit in a therapist's room and chat about it for the next 10 years. It's to recognize what we are as humans. It's to recognize that, as you said, fucking like beasts. There's a primary drive in all of us. You have to respect it. You have to honor it. You have to recognize it. But then you have to find ways to make that kind of more socially functional, more collaboratively aware. And I think the core feature for me is this sort of idea of collaboration. Being able to overt clearly what our needs are, not to repress them, not to repress yours, not to compete with yours, just to have reasonable conversations about, this is the shit I'm carrying. This is what I'm dealing with. That's what you're carrying. That's what you're dealing with. Let's actually find a way through this. Let's have a conversation about it. You can't do that when you're repressing, when you're pretending that you don't carry trauma. You questioned before, Jordan, about meditation. A lot of people, so I've taught meditation for 40 years, a lot of people meditate to escape their trauma, to go into spiritual bypass. That's why they're doing it, to avoid. That's why people pray. often to avoid. So I think, what Emil's pointing to, this need to hold ourselves and to hold our biology, hold our pain, hold our drives, and actually own them. We're a up species, and so we've got to come to terms with that.
Well, given the fact that I'm the only person, except perhaps for Mr. Clean Jordan, that didn't say the F word yet during this episode, I'm going to say it now. So the fucking like beasts theme and the full body orgasm theme, they're still running around my head. Now, on the first one, we had basically a historical epoch where repression was the name of the game on the sexual front. And then, the 60s came along, and, one of the attributes of that particular era was the free love element of it, where people were fucking like beasts. I mean, it was your place or mine after 3 seconds. What's your sign? Scorpio. Oh, me too. That's your place or mine. And that was, very widespread for a good, lucky me and Nigel and maybe you, Emil, got to live through a big chunk of that before certain obstacles were placed in the way of that. But now we're going back into another kind of repressive phase. Clearly, I mean, that's just look at the news any given day, and you see that people are basically not having sex anymore. The younger generation. I mean, it's shocking to us, maybe, but it is apparently a real thing. So maybe that comes after the free love period, and then we rediscover the joys of it as we move towards the universal full body orgasm. So what's the world look like on a day when every single human, all 8.2 billion of us, have a full body orgasm all at the same time? Is that going to be what we need to shake things up to push us into the next phase? Maybe, fingers crossed. And maybe with your new multi-billion-dollar company that you're forming, perhaps you could have a grant program that facilitated people's travels to Bali to experience that. And you never know what will happen. But just to the question of how do you get people passionate about meditating or doing anything, positive. The metaphor I always use for myself is I used to be like a big time runner, right? Like long distance runner. I was really fast, and I was running for the University of Oregon and, the premier running school of America and stuff. And I was, running like 30 kilometers a day. And then, you know what? One evening, it just became so much easier getting stoned and ordering a Domino's pizza at 3:30 in the morning, double cheese, double mushrooms. And then after that's like, screw running, I'm not doing it anymore. Too hard. So it's kind of the same thing with meditating, right? It's a lot easier to do whatever other thing is a lot easier for you personally. It might be going for a walk. It might be chowing down on a burger. Probably more likely to be chowing down on a burger in this modern, large, rotund world in which we live. So I think it's basically, one must pass through certain phases in order to go back to the thing that's actually good for you. You have to kind of let it all loose. You're very strict and regimented and you do the right thing. Gets too hard, you branch off and do the easy thing, which is very short-term satisfying, eating the burger. Then you get fat and then you realize, actually I shouldn't be eating the burger. I'm going to go back to doing the good thing, meditating. So I believe that, as with so many things, you need to pass through all these different phases before you can return to, the thing that you should probably be doing. And that applies also to the question of politics, which indeed, as we've all been mentioning in our own ways, it's the most boring topic in the world. It is the least sexy thing you could ever discuss with somebody.
Especially on a date.
Especially on a date, yeah. Guaranteed not to have full body orgasm if you bring up politics, So, I mean, but, in all seriousness, that is a very big obstacle in all of our ways, that, it is so inherently dull. I mean, you want to talk about the European Union? I mean, the European Union, despite its flaws, etc., it's inherently deeply boring, and I've had lots to do with them. And you go to a meeting in the building there in Brussels, and boy, are you going to be bored. But at the same time, It's one of the most extraordinary developments that the world has ever seen. That, a continent that used to be constantly at loggerheads and war with one another has somehow found a way to try to make a stepping stone towards something better and more collaborative. So I think that's sort of a challenge that all of us face and the whole world faces. What is like from any rational, moral, ethical perspective, it's very obvious that humans are the same wherever they are. It's very obvious that we should have structures in place that enable the full blossoming of every single human who's lucky enough to be born onto this miraculous planet. To me, I don't see how you could possibly argue against that in any rational way. And yet we are constantly blocked from coming anywhere near to achieving that, despite whatever mechanisms we put in place, let's say post 1945. Still 70% of the human race is effectively poor. 90% of the world has never set foot on an airplane. The list goes on. We have the deepest inequality that's ever been measured at any point during human civilization. There's something like 60 ongoing conflicts right now. The list goes on and on and on and on. We have nuclear weapons pointed in every direction possible. Climate change is worsening. AI is branching off into weird realms that are beyond human control. So there's, plenty of reasons to see that things are not going right. But how do we generate that interest in ordinary people? Johnny Jones is doing his shopping down at the, Aldi, and everyone else in between is just basically trying to make ends meet. All the people you see in the cars around you when you're driving down the road, all those bored faces, how do we get them to say, fucking A, I'm part of this big picture. We're all part of this miracle of life on Earth. It's unbelievable how lucky we are to have, been the egg and the sperm that formed into the being that's sitting behind that wheel of the car right now. It's a total miracle, and to appreciate that and then try to, be an active builder of that better world that people who have thought about it, like us and many others, know is possible. It's certainly, there's nothing inherently impossible about constructing a planet which is infinitely better than it is today. We have the building blocks needed. There's no question about it. But we don't do it. And that's kind of, I think, our perpetual challenge.
There's a few themes that are sort of coming together for me as we're talking. Like, the first, we've spoken about trauma. One of my friends, Dr. Trail Dow, he has this idea that trauma is fundamentally a deficit of the imagination. Trauma is fundamentally harm in the imagination. Nigel, you feel free to at some point, fill in some further thoughts around that if you've got some. And so we've been talking about creativity, arts, imagination, the role of that in, the individual and collectively. And we've also been talking about like hunger and drive and, our needs. And I guess what I'm curious about is like, is it the case, like if we go just to like the world centric level of like we should have a global government and we're trying to use our imagination, our visioning capacity to envision and create art around this brighter future, is that like is that wasted imagination if we're not actually helping people use their imagination, their creativity to like meet their lower order needs? Like those are the visions, that's the art, that's the creativity that's going to like excite people and enliven them about what's possible. Like they need to feel agency and empowerment and creativity around addressing their lower order needs. And then only then will these visions of like this beautiful, like solar punk, like gorgeous, garden planet, like kind of take off. So yeah, anyway, there's some of my reflections as where it seems like this theme of art and creativity being so significant and that's in a way an analog for our yearnings to meet our needs or something. So anyway, there's some of my thoughts. Nigel, did you want to jump in about any of these themes or topics? I'm particularly curious about this, trauma and imagination piece.
And that's sort of work I did with Trail years ago on the way that the trauma impedes the processing of the mind. So trauma is an intrusion that detemporalizes experience, and it despatializes and derelationalizes things. So trauma are these sort of ghosts that echo through our mind that constrain and restrict. And so I think this is probably the key theme that I'm hearing in our conversation today is, the need to take personal responsibility and recognition of what we carry in order to clean it up. Because unless we are taking that personal responsibility for what we carry and what we've been doing to each other for centuries, for eons, unless we do that, we'll continue to limit our minds. Our minds can't operate in a creative space if they're hiding from the echo of memories that are ghosting our reality. We're too busy then hiding from that. We're too busy compensating for that. And so, I think, Emil's point about, recognition of trauma is a fundamental one to allow that creativity, that flourishing to occur, that art to operate.
Can I just ask a question to the three of you about trauma, generally speaking? It seems to me that in the world today, if you look at the leaders that many countries are unfortunately governed by, trauma is clearly a driving force behind their behavior. And if you look at broader society, you can kind of say, well, trauma is a an either or scenario. One experiences trauma, as every human has and does in one way or another. You kind of have it. Well, maybe you don't have a choice, but maybe you do. You're either going to go in the direction of, screw everybody because I suffered, so you're going to suffer too, and I'm going to make it even worse for you because, it was bad enough for me, but man, I'm going to really get my trauma out by making you suffer. Or you go exactly in the other direction. I don't want anyone ever to feel what I felt before as the victim of trauma. And therefore, I'm going to be the most compassionate person I could ever possibly be. Obviously, I would hope that people go in the latter direction, but very often they don't. So I don't know. Does that make sense? Is that the way the world really works? Is it as simple as that? Or how do we get people more in the compassion direction rather than the hatred direction?
We need reasons, like we need compelling reasons. And I have integrated breathwork into my daily life. And it took a series of mental breakdowns in order to, in the end. So I believe having that information, I knew about this shit. Yeah. It's kind of like with the environment. You need to have the information needs to be there for a while. And then, I got some reasons to finally implement breathwork, like a habit, like a running habit. It's like you need that heart attack in order to quit the cheeseburgers sometimes. And I think it's like the same with the, if we take the European Union, you took it took two not just 2 world wars. It took 1,000 years of war. And I feel it's the same here, that when it comes to trauma, we need to be adequately traumatized, but also to have been shown adequate amounts of kindness. Because if you just thoroughly traumatized, no one's ever been kind to you, you're going to choose the former way. You're just going to be, and that's also what I see in my circles, the people who show up with an interest in metamodernism. They, on one hand, they seem to have immense privilege, but also immense trauma. It's like this both, and it's people who in some ways have had a really hard time. However, they have also had the privilege, and they are well-resourced and so it's this both andness. And that's what I believe create one of these amazing souls who actually give a damn, and who's able to make a change. I've never met anyone who've never had showing up. No, my life's just been swell. Never experienced anything bad. These people are just on the beach waiting for Armageddon. Right. This both andness of adequate trauma, and adequate privilege, kindness. I think that's the secret alchemy. And before you go out there traumatizing anyone, just no, you don't need the adequate trauma. It's already there. Don't. There's already enough trauma to go around. So you don't have to be mean to people. Just show them the kindness to balance things out. It's gonna be all right.
Yeah, I mean that's I mean what therapy is been trying to do is find ways to invest a little kindness into human relationship. I think that's its point, and I'd love to see the day where the whole role of therapy is redundant in this community, because we don't need to go and pay someone to be kind to us. It's actually part of our lived experience in the world. A great vision.
So as we're winding up, I've got one last question for you, Emil, before our lightning round of super quick questions. So this one kind of ties together some of the topics that we've covered. Like, I guess it was interesting to me to hear your frankness in terms of your own journey and you pushing on pressure points that I was like, in hindsight, you regret them. And I guess I'm wondering if there's like a fractal pattern between your own developmental journey and your own experience of what it is to fully optimize yourself and feel like fully happy and So I guess I'm curious, if in just 2 minutes, so just a quick response if you can, what's your brightest possible creative, imaginative vision for your own life and for the planet? Like the best possible scenario.
Oh, that's a really big.
In 2 minutes.
I just wanted to say that, I think it's good that, I've been humble, because otherwise I would probably have been a real asshole. And where I am right now, I believe that the best thing that I can do for myself, and my friends, that is to create, a company, that makes a lot of money, and that provides a service that I believe is direly needed out there, namely to help organizations become more resonant, and to function with adequate complexity. So, and that's like a humble little, that's where I've landed now. I'm not gonna be the next Che Guevara or some shit. Like, I put my Jesus complex behind me. It's like, I just want to be a normal dude, um, running a company, having some clients, and, hanging out with my colleagues, having a chat at the, what's it called? The water machine.
Love it. And 1 minute on best possible, most inspiring vision for all of us, the planet.
Well, I think we already mentioned it. Full body orgasms 3 times a week. I think that would be pretty awesome.
Awesome. All right. So rapid fire round. So just the first thing that comes into your mind, Emil. So in one word, how would you describe the state of democracy around the world right now?
And shittified.
What's the biggest obstacle to people seeing themselves as world citizens rather than national citizens?
Human nature.
What's one thing you do personally to stay emotionally regulated when you encounter deep political disagreement?
Breathwork and the occasional cigarette.
Psychology or policy? If you had to put more faith in one to fix the world's problems, which would it be?
Psychology.
Who's your unexpected hero of world citizenship? Someone people might not immediately think of.
David Bowie.
What gives you genuine hope right now, even amidst so much division and instability?
No hope. None whatsoever.
Finish this sentence. Democracy will thrive when we learn to
regulate our emotions and connect with ourselves and other human beings.
Thank you, Emil. So this has been a very rich, in some ways took some unexpected turns, this conversation. And I've really thoroughly enjoyed it. What we do to end is we do little checkouts. So if each of us can just take, a minute or two just to kind of share any concluding remarks, anything to help us feel complete, any reflections on the course of this conversation. So I will throw it open to whoever wants to go first.
I'm feeling very hopeful in the hopelessness.
I'm feeling very hopeful in the hope. I'm still a naively hopeful guy that very much sees the potentiality of our species to find the right way, despite all the obstacles and despite all the very real carnage and suffering that I have personally witnessed for decades, working in disaster zones and war zones and slums and areas of deep deprivation. I think that at the core we all as humans realize intuitively the world that we would like to see, but we just haven't found our way there yet. And we are going to find it. Don't know what it will necessarily look like, and don't know, and certainly know that the journey will be hard and painful, but I'm still hopeful and think in, millennially long time frames. I'm not thinking in 5-year time frames or an election cycle. I'm thinking in terms of planetary lifespans. And, we need to somehow find ways to reach that point. And I think every discussion that everyone everywhere has on these issues gets us just that much closer.
Yeah, well, I have a theoretical optimism. Very strong. Like, I know that we have evolved from dust till Shakespeare. And it's inevitable that something akin to the listening society, something beyond listening society, something much more enlightened will evolve. And whether that will be the human species or not doesn't really matter. Personally, I'm a big fan of raccoons. They could eventually evolve. It could also be octopuses, squids, are likely to become these enlightened beings at some point. So in that regard, I'm a hard determinist. But whether it applies to us as a human species,
Nigel, could you share any more? I mean, your checkout was very brief. I'd love a little bit more from you if possible.
What I mean with the hope and the hopelessness is the giving up on delusions, the giving up on these sort of constructed things that we do to avoid ourselves. And, by avoiding ourselves and avoiding our own suffering, we avoid each other. We don't actually make meaningful relationship because we're trying to avoid so much of what's in us. So to give up on all this, to give up on all these delusions, to give up on all these kind of fallacious hopes is actually to become engaged in reality, in our own personal reality and in our interpersonal reality, and the reality of what we've done as a species on this planet. And then we might have a chance of waking up. Just maybe.
I totally agree.
And just imagine the parties.
That what I've seen is that in many ways, these developmental theories, they lead to determinism, right? And also, so many of the questions I got pertaining to the listening society, so this is what's going to happen. This is the future. This is futurism. And I was like, no, you completely misunderstood it. This is a manifesto, an invitation for you to create. And then, like 5 years after, so dude, where's my listening society? What's taking you so long? Like, no, this is not what I intended. So in many ways, like these theory, very disembodied. We delude us in and also hope. We hope, we don't act. Right? There's a bit of I hope this is no, it's not. It's Armageddon. You can do things. You can avoid the meteors, but it's up to you to act. To sit and hope. Nah, man. Where there's hope, there's death, and we need to act. And right now, I'm inviting people to do something with these ideas instead of waiting for Hansi, Santa Claus to come and save us all. Because he ascended back to the mountain because he got tired and fed up with people. So, yeah, sorry, the moment passed.
Yeah, so for me, gosh, so many things. I feel like this has been a wide-ranging conversation, and it's touched on a lot of things I'm really passionate about. I think the thing that's coming up for me is, when I first came across Integral, it was really this explosion, awakening sort of thing. And then I was like, oh man, this mythical group, these Integral people, they're really the cutting edge. And then I got to go and meet a bunch of them in 2019. And it was awesome on the one hand, but it was also a little bit like some of the projections of this being this epic, group of people who are going to save the world, it evaporated to some extent. And I guess what I hear in your story, Emil, is a really sincere journey to take your aspirations and your passions be, you know, audacious and bold and, you know, and hit brick walls and meander and change and course correct. And I guess that in terms of my own experience, that's been more true to my own experience of evolution, is it's been this some ways really brutal, painful, excruciating, wondrous, magical, organic, recursively flowing process. So yeah, been awesome to sit with you in I guess this sense of a common values, common values and common mission. And yeah, just hear this beautiful creative way that you describe your own process and what you're aiming for. And yeah, wishing you all the best with this company in this next phase. May it bear many fruits for you and for many people. So that's all from me. Scott, did you want to say anything to close us out?
Well, first of all, thank you, Emil. It's very, very great to meet you and to hang
Likewise.
out for a
Thank
couple
you.
hours. Hopefully we can do it in the real world one day.
Hopefully.
You know, I think some people will see this conversation as controversial or, you know, too hard to deal with because it's so realistic, you know. But I thoroughly enjoyed it. I think all of us did. And, you know, your insights into so many different dimensions are like so very useful and timely for the challenges that face all of us. Um, and yeah, just keep going. And I definitely like your emphasis on art being the first phase. And you know, life and history generally is just a series of cycles and phases, running the full course and then starting over, and then running the full course and starting over, and hopefully you end up at a slightly better place. And you know, maybe that's where we're at now. Maybe we're at the art phase of the next round, and let's just see what comes of it, you know, and hope that it culminates in that 8.2 billion person simultaneous full body orgasm experience that might bring us to a place we can't even imagine. So thank you again, Emil.
Thank you. Been a pleasure.
Thanks for watching. This was Democracy Tomorrow, the latest episode focusing on the work of Emil Ejner Friis. And it's linked, of course, to our upcoming Democracy Mind course, which will be held from the 8th of October until the 17th of December, 2026. We hope you'll join us. You can look up democracymind.org for further details on the course and how to sign up if you're interested. Please let us know what you think, like and subscribe, help us to reach our targets in terms of viewership and impact. And with that, I will sign off and say, see you next time with Democracy Tomorrow.